It's 19 minutes before 1 o'clock. This is Country Fare from WGN Radio in Chicago. Here is a bulletin from WGN News just handed me. President Kennedy has been shot and seriously wounded.
An American president shot dead in the street.
It's 10 minutes before 1 o'clock. And all other news that we might bring you on our Country Fair show today is paled indeed by the tragic news from Dallas, Texas.
It was boom, boom, boom.
A defining day for a generation.
We cried along with everybody.
President John F. Kennedy assassinated in broad daylight.
Who killed Kennedy?
I was given the task of releasing that. The rest is for you to look at.
The official investigations leaving open questions.
What you're suggesting is that there was a conspiracy to kill the president.
CIA counterintelligence was complicit in Kennedy's death. That's what the new evidence tells us.
And now, the JFK files are officially out there.
All of the Kennedy files, approximately 80,000 pages.
Do we finally have the answers to one of history's greatest mysteries?
Everything will be revealed.
Or is declassification a big disappointment?
This isn't a nothing burger. Take your nothing burger and eat it. We have a new fact pattern.
This will be a relentless pursuit of truth and transparency. We've been treated like children for too long and kept in the dark by those we elected to serve us.
I know there was a cover-up, a massive cover-up, and it goes on and on.
Including a rare interview with Abraham Zapruder, the man whose footage became a worldwide obsession.
How many shots did you hear?
Well, that's a question that came up quite a few times.
It all starts now in this NewsNation special report.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to Declassified The JFK Assassination. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart. And of course, we're doing this in the wake of what is probably the biggest release ever of JFK files. Files that purportedly allow us to shed more light on the mysteries surrounding the assassination of JFK in November of 1963. Let's get into the detail in this program tonight. I'm very keen to also get to the bottom of what the implications are for this for Congress's efforts for transparency and accountability on other issues, including the UFO issue that we've been running with here on NewsNation. If they can't get to the truth on the JFK case by releasing the archives, what hope have we for MLK, RFK, Epstein, and all the other mysteries and conspiracies that some in Congress are determined to get to the bottom of? I guess we were all a bit naive because surely to God, if you were the CIA or some conspirator trying to hide your dark role in the murder of a president in a terrible coup d'etat that's been covered up now for nearly 62 years, why would you put it in writing? And why would you ever allow such a document to get anywhere near the National Archives? A lot of people will be convinced, whatever comes out of this week's release, that there was a conspiracy involving the murder of our president in November of 1963, and there's no convincing them that there was no conspiracy. And frankly, as you'll see today, I do think there are arguments that are worthy of investigation, that there should be a broader investigation into claims that there were multiple shooters and the unanswered questions surrounding the forensics from the original Warren Commission that have only now more recently come to light. It's probably the most immortal moment in American history. November 22nd, 1963, the killing of a president. Let's first remember what happened that fateful day.
His rendezvous with grim destiny begins a little after noontime as his plane lands in Dallas.
November 22nd, 1963. John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy taking Texas by storm. The celebrated couple flew into Dallas Love Field on Air Force One, where a Lincoln Continental convertible waited to take them and the Texas governor through crowds in downtown Dallas.
There was a lot of anxiety that morning among the police officers because we were very happy that the president was going to be in town.
Thousands lined the 10-mile route as the presidential motorcade made its way towards downtown Dealey Plaza.
I hollered at him, "Welcome, Mr. President."
They were just gorgeous people, big, like bigger than life.
And the crowd is absolutely going wild. This is a friendly crowd in downtown Dallas.
Covering streets and sidewalks, at some points the crowd was several rows deep.
We heard people saying, "They're coming, they're coming." Just as they were approaching us, something happened.
We turned the corner into Dealey Plaza, and then there was a bang, bang, like that. I said, "Those are shots. Stop the bus." The air was filled with the most unbelievable sound. The screaming of thousands of people. It's as though 30 choirs had all gone berserk.
President John F. Kennedy was shot once in the neck and then again in the back of the head.
So we heard the first shot, and the president, I don't know who was hit first, but the president jumped up in his seat, and I thought it scared him. I thought it was a firecracker because he looked, fear. And then as the car got directly in front of us, well, a gunshot apparently from behind us hit the president in the side of the temple.
Kennedy's head just literally exploded. I saw tissue and everything.
It was 12:30 p.m. when the convertible turned off Main Street at Dealey Plaza.
It's only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
This is the official version of what happened. The assassin Lee Harvey Oswald used a rifle to shoot President Kennedy from the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. The first bullet pierced Kennedy in the back of the neck, exiting through his throat before striking the Texas governor.
We were running different directions. People were covering up their children.
The crowd just became a mob, and everybody was running down the middle of Main Street.
Kennedy toppled over, just went on over into Jackie's lap.
Something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
Secret Service agent Clint Hill jumped on top, pushing Mrs. Kennedy back inside the vehicle and covering her and the president. The motorcade rushed to Parkland Hospital, where 30 minutes later, President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. Shocked supporters rushed to Parkland Hospital, crying, hugging, grieving the loss. Shortly afterward, Dallas police found Oswald hiding in a movie theatre, where he was arrested and charged.
And I remember him saying, "I didn't shoot anybody, I'm just a patsy."
2 days later, as live television covered Oswald moving through the basement of the Dallas Police Department headquarters, Oswald was shot by local nightclub owner Jack Ruby.
I witnessed the president being killed, and I witnessed Oswald being killed.
The FBI said it concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. The Warren Commission, established by President Lyndon Johnson to investigate Kennedy's death, spent nearly a year studying the assassination, compiling an 889-page final report, and it agreed that Oswald acted alone. So first up, Jefferson Morley. He's an ex-Wash Post journalist for 15 years. He also hosts the JFK Facts Substack and podcast. Jefferson, a lot of the commentary from this week suggests that this release of JFK documents is all a big nothing burger, that most of the documents that have been released have already been released, and frankly, there's nothing in it. What's your response?
The people who are saying that don't really know what's in these records. I've been looking at these records, and in the last 48 hours, I found a pretty convincing fact pattern that shows that CIA counterintelligence was responsible for Kennedy's assassination. Let me repeat that, because I haven't said that before in 30 years of reporting. But the documents that I saw this week really confirm that impression. Now, what's the smoking gun? I don't have a smoking gun. I have a fact pattern not a theory. And the fact pattern shows that CIA counterintelligence officers targeted Oswald for recruitment as an agent in 1959. They put him under surveillance for the next 4 years. And when the Warren Commission and JFK investigators came asking about it, they lied to the Warren Commission. They lied to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They lied to the Assassination Records Review Board. And official secrecy still conceals aspects of what I'm talking about. So what we've learned from the JFK records that were released is this deep CIA involvement with Oswald before Kennedy's assassination, the deception that followed, and we're looking ahead to the documents that we don't have yet.
You are asserting that the facts now show that the CIA was involved in a conspiracy to murder the president, a coup d'etat?
They were complicit in the events that led to the wrongful death of the president. I don't know who the intellectual authors of this are, but we know that the intellectual author of Kennedy's death was not Lee Harvey Oswald. What we're trying to figure out is who was really responsible. And you know what? I don't have an answer to that. I don't know who killed Kennedy, but I do know that CIA counterintelligence was complicit in Kennedy's death. That's what the new evidence tells us.
Now, the thing that always leapt out at me, sir, was the implausibility that somebody like Oswald, who was so clearly connected to people in the CIA, and even during his military service, he'd worked at a place called Atsugi in Japan, which was the deployment position for the U-2 spy missions over the Soviet Union. It always seemed utterly implausible to me that somebody who'd worked at one of the most sensitive, top secret facilities, a CIA facility no less, in the United States military, that they wouldn't be in some way connected with the intelligence community. But can you please explain to me what it is in the documents that you've seen, the fact trail of documents that you've seen this week, that has finally cemented your view that there was indeed, and this is extraordinary, a coup d'etat against the president?
Oswald is never regarded as a security threat in the eyes of James Angleton and the other people in counterintelligence. He has some other function because he, like you say, he sets off all these security bells. He said he was going to disclose secrets to the Soviet Union. He got arrested for fighting with the CIA's favorite Cubans in Miami. He went to Mexico City and indicated an idea to travel to Cuba, a violation of U.S. law at the time. He met with a KGB officer known to be, an assassin. And none of this changes how the CIA counterintelligence staff regards him. And they let him go on his way to Dallas. Like I said, James Angleton, one of the top men in the CIA, had 2 FBI reports on Oswald on his desk on November 14th and November 15th. That is confirmed in the latest JFK releases.
On the evidence, do you think Lee Harvey Oswald was one of the shooters that was involved in the assassination of JFK?
I doubt that he was, but let's assume that he was. He was not the only shooter, and he was not the intellectual author of Kennedy's death. But if people want to say he was up in the window firing a gun, let's accept that for the purposes of understanding what happened. Everything that I'm talking about the responsibility of CIA counterintelligence is not disputing the notion that Oswald was up in the window. I don't think he was, and I don't think the evidence supports that. But if you want to understand what I'm talking about, let's not argue about where Oswald was. Let's argue about the actions of the CIA counterintelligence.
Back in February, you set out a list of what you called the JFK most wanted. There were 15 documents that you said were, not only were they known to exist, so there's no fishing expedition involved, they were known to be in the possession of the government and can be easily retrieved, and they've never been seen in their entirety by the public, which is a complete violation of the JFK Records Act. Yeah. How many of those 15 documents did you get for the first time in their unexpurgated, unredacted form?
We got 5 of them. We got about 2/3 of the records that are held, of the JFK records that are held by the National Archives. There's about 1,000 more, probably another 20,000 pages that are going to be released, and we don't know when. The Trump administration has never said that. Now, there's a lot of other JFK documents out there that we still haven't seen. There's the 2,400 records that the FBI found in response to Trump's order. I talked to the FBI and they said, we've turned those over to the National Archives. I asked the National Archives when those would be released, and they said they didn't answer. So those are records that are also out there. And then there's two other categories of records. There's records that are still held by the CIA or the FBI that are not in possession of the National Archives. And then there's other records that are in possession of the Kennedy family itself. So all of those are subject to, all those records are subject to Trump's orders. So we've gotten a lot of what we wanted, but a lot remains.
Now, Sir, one of the most fascinating examples of a document that has previously been redacted, censored, and which this week has been allowed to be seen properly for the first time, is a document written by Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who was a JFK aide, later went on to become a historian. And he was asked by the president, by JFK, to write a proposal for a restructuring of the CIA. And this came, as you know, after the 1961 debacle of the Bay of Pigs, where the CIA launched an absolutely disastrous invasion of Cuba that led to the capture and imprisonment of many Cuban emigre Cubans who'd come in as soldiers with the American support. What did... In the original redacted document, there's basically a big black blur over
there's
one
a whole
particular
page missing.
Yeah. What does that document show that is so interesting?
You know, I was calling attention to this document a couple of years ago and called it the most important blank page in American history. And I'm glad that people are picking up on it because it is an extraordinary document. The black page concerned what were called controlled American sources. Okay, and a controlled American source is a source that's totally under control of the American government, i.e. CIA officers under cover at embassies, under State Department cover at U.S. embassies. So that's what, in his memo, Schlesinger is making the case for reorganizing the CIA because Kennedy was very upset. And he felt that the CIA had tried to impose their policy on him at the Bay of Pigs. So he's very angry, and Schlesinger offers him a solution, and he writes this memo making the case. In the middle of that, he returns to the question of controlled American sources. And for 62 years, the CIA did not want us to read this page. And when you see the page now, you can well understand why. It provides a devastating portrait of the CIA's encroachment, that was Schlesinger's word, on the president's foreign policy making powers. And he explained how that happens with a couple of eye-popping statistics. First, that at the time of Kennedy's inauguration, 47% of political officers in U.S. embassies around the world were actually CIA agents, CIA officers.
So people operating under State Department cover or diplomatic cover were basically CIA operatives, and they were almost 50% of what was being represented overseas.
Right. And these people are also in a position to report to the State Department. I mean, they have as many people reporting on local political reality as the State Department. How many political officers around the world today are CIA officers? Is it still 47%? And the fact is, we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because it's a secret, right? So now we can find out about, well, what's the reality of CIA power 60 years ago? But part of the story is, so what's the story today? And then you see, this is what you see in the JFK stories. You see not just the absurdity, but the perniciousness of the secrecy system and how it shapes political debate and prevents political debate.
On the face of that document, we know that Donald Trump was persuaded by the CIA not to run that document, not to release it during his first term. Is there any good reason that could justify why the CIA tried to keep it secret during Trump's first administration?
I don't see any. I mean, is it essential to the national security of the United States that neither the American people nor anybody else in the world knows that half of U.S. embassy officials are CIA officers? I mean, I guess it enables the CIA to, trick people a little bit better if they didn't know that. But among the people being tricked are the U.S. taxpayers, the U.S. citizens, U.S. voters. So, the enemy is not the only person that's tricked by this. The American people are deceived by it. And, look at this, Roz. We're talking about the assassination of an American president. And these people are keeping secrets. And then they turn around and say, well, it's a nothing burger. There's nothing here. Move along. Like, give me a break. Your behavior is extraordinarily suspicious over 60 years. No, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. This isn't a nothing burger that CIA officials are all over a man who supposedly killed the president. This is serious business. Take your nothing burger and eat it.
Jefferson Morley, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me, Ross. It's been a great talk.
Coming up, Geraldo Rivera, the investigative journalist who broke, for the first time, the public release of the Zapruder film. We've also got Abe Zapruder, the guy who actually shot the movie, and we'll be interviewing Daniel Sheehan, a veteran civil rights attorney who spent a large part of his life investigating conspiracies inside America's military-industrial complex, particularly the JFK case. So now I'd like to bring in one of the legends of American broadcasting, Geraldo Rivera. Mr. Rivera, welcome.
Thanks, Ross. Nice to be here.
Let's talk about how you procured the Zapruder film, which frankly, I think changed everything for the JFK assassination story.
It certainly unleashed a torrent of conspiracy theories. I was contacted by Robert Groden, who you know, who is an archivist and a historian. Actually, the person who reached out to me was Dick Gregory, the entertainer, who knew me and knew that I was interested in investigative reporting. Had a show at the time, Good Night America. So they came to me and we saw the Zapruder film, as you described, it was astounding to see. It was shocking. It was horrifying. It was to see the murder of the 35th president, the young and gracious 35th president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, right before your eyes. But it was the beginning of a real fight with Time Life was the company at that time, had the copyright on the Zapruder film, and they were not letting anyone use it. So here I had it. I had this, I don't know, seemed the scoop of the century. And they would not let me air it. I went to ABC and I said, I tell you what, I will take complete legal responsibility. So I ultimately had to sign a document with ABC, my network, wherein I accepted personal responsibility for the airing, the one-time only airing of the Zapruder film. And we put it on and it launched an industry, Ross.
One of the things, for example, that comes through in the Mexico City documents that were released just this week is that there are, in fact, voluminous times that the CIA could have been able to, with its tapping and its surveillance in Mexico City, definitively confirm what Oswald was up to in Mexico City. But they really didn't. And they whilst they did have him under surveillance after he returned to Dallas, it's quite clear that there were egregious failures. What's your take on that?
Well, the CIA in that period was infamous for its bungling. But the most egregious example of CIA incompetence is the Bay of Pigs invasion, where Cuban exiles were told by the CIA that they would not need military support from other nations, that if necessary, the U.S. would provide air support, that there would be logistical support, that maybe even troops. They were assured that Cuba would rise up in revolution against Castro. I believe that the biggest news is, what were all those pages redacted for? Why are they all blacked out? Now they're not blacked out anymore, and you read some of these documents, and you see that maybe what the CIA was doing with the redactions, with the obscuring of the text, is protecting their own asses for their own incompetence, plus their own methods, and maybe even the names of operators of some of their agents.
It is extraordinary that we're 60 years on and the public is still engaged with this issue. There's still, mass public interest. Here we are doing a primetime special about it. Why do you think there is such a fascination with this story?
I think you're absolutely right. It is one of the most intriguing stories in my lifetime. I've been in the business 54 plus years in the journalism business. It's the mystery that that clings to those dark recesses of my own mind. I think that the biggest reason, I believe, for the fascination is that John Kennedy was like a saint to the American people. He was so refreshing, so energetic, so telegenic. He had a perfect wife, perfect children. He encapsulated, he embodied the American spirit, the young and vigorous and energetic. So here's Kennedy up here, and here's Lee Harvey Oswald down here. Here's a dope, a scumbag, a traitor, deserter, Russian sympathizer. So the difference between the purported assassin and the target is so vast, we just can't wrap our minds around the fact that that man, that lowlife, could take away Camelot from America.
Geraldo Rivera, one of my favorite sayings in investigative journalism is always assume a screw-up before a conspiracy. And maybe that's what the JFK case was. Maybe it was just the CIA trying to cover up its bungling. Geraldo Rivera, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure, Ross. Thank you.
Coming up, the Zapruder film. That shocking imagery of the murder of a president. Was it a conspiracy? We'll be talking to Abe Zapruder, but first up, Daniel Sheehan, attorney, civil rights lawyer who spent a large part of his life investigating dark secrets in the military-industrial complex. I'd now like to bring in constitutional attorney, lawyer Daniel Sheehan, a civil rights lawyer with a great background running back 50 years, who spent a lot of time investigating the crimes of the CIA exposed during Watergate and the Church Commission. Danny, what comes out of your, I admit it would have to be a very brief analysis of the voluminous documents that have been revealed this week in the JFK documents archive? Have you been able to reach any conclusions?
So I started going through them, and I started noticing, things that I hadn't known about, particularly before, that the details of different people that they investigated and that they found were, less than totally loyal to the country and all those things. And the fact that they were, surprise, wiretapping the embassy, the Russian embassy, in Mexico City, some things like that.
Why do you believe there was a conspiracy to kill JFK?
Allen Dulles did it. Allen Dulles had already been dismissed by Kennedy as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, back in September of 1961, following the fiasco at the Bay of Pigs. And so he was pushed into retirement. But Dulles never left Washington. He stayed right there in Georgetown and was meeting regularly with Bissell and the other guys that were in the CIA. They kept meeting with Dulles, and Dulles continued to be sort of the de facto director of the agency still, because Kennedy brought in John McCone, who was a total outsider, but Dulles remained the actual operational chief. It was Dulles that greenlighted the assassination. Allen Dulles had discovered that John F. Kennedy, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, was having a secret exchange of letters with Khrushchev, and that they were agreeing together secretly through this back channel that they had going, that the CIA didn't know about at all and hadn't authorized, that John Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were talking about using their respective executive authorities to start disassembling the nuclear warheads of both nuclear arsenals, because they were both so terrified about how close they had come to destroying the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis that they both agreed they were going to do this. And John Kennedy was in the process of getting ready to start ordering the dismantling and destruction of the U.S. nuclear warheads. And Allen Dulles wasn't going to allow that to happen, because not in his capacity as the CIA director, even the fired CIA director, but because he was the legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, a group of major financial businessmen who had major investment interests in Asia. And they knew that they needed to keep the nuclear weapons in order to combat China, because China had showed them in Korea that they could put 1 million men into uniform and they needed the nuclear weapons.
Do you think Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in the murder of JFK in any capacity at all?
Yes, absolutely. The whole purpose of Oswald was to take a shot at the caravan, at the Kennedy caravan coming through Dallas. And then when he got caught, he was going to have all these manufactured relations with Russia and with Cuba, hopefully, and they could blame it on them so they could use that to justify invading the island of Cuba.
There's clear evidence that Oswald was under surveillance. But from what you're suggesting, the implication is that the leadership of the CIA at the time was unwittingly caught up in a plot that they really didn't have any knowledge of.
Well, I would think that probably Bissell knew. Bissell was close enough to Dulles to know that they were getting set to kill the president. And you need to understand, the reason that they had to kill him, they thought, was because he was a traitor. He was actually getting set to start disassembling the nuclear warheads of our United States nuclear arsenal. I mean, they couldn't wait for a year to the 1964 elections to get rid of him, because he would have undertaken the disassembly of our nuclear warheads. People have to listen up. You know, if people are saying, oh, let's all get excited about the fact that they're releasing 80,000 documents about the Kennedy assassination, and the major media are going to play it, oh, well, we've searched through it and there's no smoking gun here. There's nothing of great revelation. So therefore, we have always been right. There's been no conspiracy. You know, I mean, anybody who believes that ought to have their head examined.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Terrific. I appreciate it. Let's all stay after this. We'll get it.
Coming up, is there a UFO connection to the murder of JFK? It's an intriguing allegation, but one that cannot be entirely discounted. And we'll also be talking to Abe Zapruder, the man who shot that shocking video of the murder of a president.
That's very important, what you're hearing, because there was a sound recording made of the actual shots. Defenders of the Warren Commission and the single bullet theory claim that the recording wasn't made in the plaza. In the background on that tape, you can hear that bell going off, which proves that it was done here. There were 4 of us who worked on the acoustics evidence. I was one of the 4. In the Library of Congress, I transferred a Zapruder copy from the Secret Service copy, which has no splices in it, with the actual sound recording. And we found that there were more shots than the government admitted to. People know me for releasing the Zapruder film, which doesn't show people running to the knoll because he stopped filming. But several other people show probably pretty close to 200 people rushing toward the knoll, chasing the assassin. Not just heard the shots, but saw the smoke too.
And how many of those people were featured in the evidence presented in the public volumes of the Warren Commission?
Virtually none.
Even a policeman gave evidence that he confronted a man when he ran around behind the fence there, thinking he'd heard shots coming from that direction.
Right.
And there was a man who didn't look like a service agent who showed him Secret Service credentials.
Right.
That's in evidence.
It's in evidence, and in my book, I published 2 photographs of the guy up there. He was photographed, but no one's been able to identify him.
What did the Warren Commission say about that?
They didn't.
Something tells me that veteran JFK assassination investigator Robert Groden will not be satisfied with claims that there was no conspiracy in the murder of President JFK, just because there's nothing that says it in black and white in these new files released this week to the archives. It is a bit naive, as I expect, to think that there might have been something in those files suggesting some kind of CIA conspiracy. Why would they put it in writing? But there certainly are unanswered questions involving the assassination, and none more so than the questions that are posed by the video, the film of the assassination itself, a video shot by Abraham Zapruder on the day. And here is his interview with our correspondent, Marvin Scott.
Abraham Zapruder, an unassuming dress manufacturer, is the man behind the iconic video record of an unforgettable and scarring moment in history. Zapruder and his Bell & Howell camera were, simply put, at the right place at the right time.
I saw the motorcycles, then the car approached, and Jacqueline and the president were waving, and as it came in line with my camera, I heard a shot. I saw the president lean over to Jacqueline, then the second shot came. And then I realized, I saw his head open up, and I started yelling, "They killed him, they killed him." And I continued shooting until he went under the underpass. It's left in my mind like a wound that heals up, but yet there's some pain left as to what has happened.
The film is only 26.6 seconds, but in the years afterward, it has gone through thousands of hours of frame-by-frame scrutiny and has been the centerpiece of every official investigation. But Zapruder, the man who captured history for the nation, says he did not hear a second gunman.
Do you feel the shots perhaps came from behind the fence or behind you on the grassy knoll?
No, as a matter of fact, I heard some comments about us, and I went back to the place where I stood when I shot these pictures and looked to that wooden fence that we're talking about. I believe it's about between 30 or 35 feet away from where I was standing. I believe I would have heard different sound, a shot coming from my right ear.
Abraham Zapruder died in 1970, a quiet, unassuming man who never expected to be immortalized, particularly by a horrible moment in history.
So, Marvin, Abraham Zapruder was a notoriously shy interviewee. How did you get the interview?
He was extremely shy, and he tried his darndest to stay away from the media. And the best way to describe it is, as his granddaughter describes it in her book, 26 Seconds. I cajoled, I pleaded, and used good old-fashioned charm to convince him to do the interview.
Coming up, the UFO connection. Is there one with the murder of JFK? Was the president killed because of what he knew about UFOs? I now want to bring in Jeff Cruikshank, an Australian security consultant who's worked previously for an Australian intelligence organisation. Jeff's done a lot of work combing through the archives on the interesting American nuclear tests that took place during the Pacific when they were testing thermonuclear weapons in the Pacific. It was a subject of great interest for Australians because we were getting your radiation. But what was particularly interesting was the evidence of some kind of anomalous object that was being brought down by those weapons tests. And Jeff put together the fact that this was an issue of concern for JFK. JFK was actually genuinely concerned that these anomalous objects might lead the Soviets to the impression that the Americans were launching some kind of preemptive strike. And the reason why this is all relevant to the JFK archives is because there was a scientist who was involved in this operation called David Lamar Christ, or Christ, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And he was involved in an operation, I think, called Palladium, that you've told us about before, where it was discovered the Americans were spoofing UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, in Soviet airspace, so that the Soviets would get used to the idea of seeing fake readings on their radars, and that would lead them to the false impression there was nothing there, when in fact there was something there. It would be an American strike. We've always known that in the JFK archives there's a file for David Lamar Christ, and it's significant because he was taken prisoner by the Cubans at this time in the 1960s, and there was always a fear that he had leaked the secrets of this Operation Palladium to the Soviets under torture, under interrogation. Has there been any more light shed on that operation in the documents released this week?
Yes, there has been. I've found fully declassified National Security Council notes memos from their meetings.
Basically, the documents that have been released this week, they substantiate the fact that Christ was taken prisoner in Cuba.
Yeah, and they were trying to break him out. And a lot of people have thought that maybe the Bay of Pigs was actually a cover for the jailbreak and the Cubans knew that was a possibility as well, because they actually lined the Isle of Pines prison with explosives in case that the jailbreak attempt happened. They just blow it up and kill Christ and everyone with it.
Jeff Cruikshank, thank you so much for speaking to us, and we'll look forward to hearing your results from your continued digging through the JFK files in future months to come.
Thanks very much, Ross.
Up next, JFK's own words. We should remember that as well as being a political leader, JFK was a father, a husband, a person who is remembered very passionately and strongly by so many people, not just in America, but all around the world. He was a beacon of freedom, of democracy, of America as the good guys. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart. Thank you very, very much for joining me on this NewsNation Primetime Special. I hope we've been able to answer some of your questions about this enduring mystery, 62 years on.
All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.